Notice to Spacemen by Oliver Arnold. Narrated by Adam 11 Labs. 1. Engineer Ed woke to the oscillating vibration of a poorly aligned hyperdrive. Inspecting himself in the mirror of the tiny cabin, he found that his reflection blurred periodically at 1.2 seconds. Normally, that meant recalibration, but out here. He grabbed the communicator and checked his casino tickets. A win! 300 bitbucks. What a way to start day 1266. The crew weren't allowed to gamble, but who was going to enforce that in the middle of nowhere? He reached for a can and scraped the last bits of gloop out. While rolling the substance into a sausage, Ed gazed at the twinkle star-spotted curtains that covered the only window of his cabin. The simplistic art dissonates with the smooth, metallic elegance of the ship, he thought, then shoved the putty into his ear and thought no more. "Hart, draw curtains," Ed commanded. After an eternity, a reply sounded from everywhere. "No thanks." When Ed opened the drapes himself, they revealed yawning blackness spattered with dirty splotches of deep space. Reality didn't match the art. He forced himself into his too small, too ornate uniform, put on a ridiculous hat, and left. Generated music filled the hallway that Ed now plodded down, elevator tunes that weren't limited to vertical transports. The pleasures, the luxuries, the indulgences. A PA system blared exuberant messages advertising the ship. "Journey to Jupiter on the Astro Tiara and sample our 5,000 Venusian drafts." Ed trudged on without heeding the ads. The superlatives persisted. "Ski the infinite spiral slopes of Pot 9. Dip and sip the mineral pools of Poseidos." Ed passed a gallery from the ship's cruising era that no one had bothered to remove. Glitch, the Tiara's owner, had converted the craft into a settling vessel in 2288, as it provided all facilities for a comfortable ride while having depreciated enough to be left behind on a fresh planet. "All worlds are certified alien-free," boasted the ad. The focus shifted, and a commanding individual with aviators appeared to grin at the camera. "I guarantee it," he declared, giving a thumbs up. The screen changed to show swimsuited crowds getting down on Party World Ibiza. Ed had enough. "Hart, silence ads. Book your adventure now! Now! Now!" The flashing commercials looped obnoxiously as the ship waited for a commitment. The corridor had been transformed into a disco. Then, suddenly, the answer came. "Too busy," the Tiara's computer said. Ed was furious. "Can't you detect it's me and not play this stuff every time? You have sensors all over." The recordings continued unabated, and Ed felt that they had increased in volume. He passed a worn lime-green bath mat that covered the threshold to the bridge. When the engineer vanished through the hatch, the audio shut off behind him. The flight deck held about a dozen workstations and was surrounded by an enormous glass dome that opened the view into space in all directions. Sparkle Star uniformed operators busied themselves at their stations. It was eerily quiet, and the few who spoke did so only in hushed voices. Sparsely decorated, the place's only frills were a few carelessly framed pictures of Earth along the walls. They resembled a planetarium's, only here the stars were real. Ed made his way toward a girl perched at the very bow. Right at the glass, she sat folded, smiling and swaying from side to side, immersed in a tunnel of blurred stars. Ani, I wanted to ask, do you have any ear-zonks you can spare?" Ed inquired. "Sure," said the girl and handed him a box. "Want to watch the universe with me?" "I'm going to sit at my desk." He pointed at it like she didn't know where it was and made off, stuffing the mud into his lobe. Ed had never been one to gaze at the stars back on Earth, and he wasn't planning on making this a habit now. At his station, Ed shoved last night's dinner onto the floor, being careful not to sweep his favorite cup. A service robot shot from the wall and zoomed toward the offending trash. It circled, surveying the disagreeable material, and kept spinning. It had gone mad long ago. Ed activated his display. He'd received a message. The document showed rows upon rows of text. "Notice to Spacemen, steer clear, solitary blah, shipping blah blah." The words blurred in front of Ed. "Man, I just made 500 bitbucks!" Jimph, Ed's neighbor, exclaimed. "No shit!" Ed hit acknowledged, and the memo vanished. "I won 300 this morning." "Did you spend it on Zonk?" "Course." They looked up. A man, likewise sporting a star-crested uniform and hat, had danced his way forward ahead of all desks and crew. He was tall, with hair like a breaking wave and sporting mirrored aviators. The glass dome, with its advanced electromagnetic filters, provided excellent protection from light in many spectrums, rendering personal eye protection entirely unnecessary. Ed elbowed his colleague. "Harrow dancing?" He gulped. "That real?" Jimph didn't react. He was now counting the pixels on his screen and had made it somewhere near the middle. "Don't know anymore," he finally said. "He's right there," Whisper shouted Ed. "Don't see it." The dancer, meanwhile, had ended his performance and swayed over to Ed's desk, who quickly stared back at his screen. "Mr. Ed, passenger check, please," said the man, visibly out of breath. "Why don't you ask the ship's heart, Captain?" Ed replied while his weaselly eyes bored into the man's reflection in front of him. "Computer, conduct passenger health check," Captain Harrow hollered. The speakers sounded. "I'm really busy right now with the trajectories," the system answered. "That's why," said the captain. Ed closed his eyes. He waited forever, then reopened them. "I'm still here." "So you are." With robotic routine, Ed click-pointed here and there while rows of data, graphs, and tables scrolled. A counter ran insanely fast up to 30,000, where it stopped, turning green. "All A-OK, mon capitan," Ed saluted, but Captain Harrow disagreed. "The last time I heard that we had to decommission the ship, couldn't get rid of the stench," he proclaimed. "I'd better check myself." Ed nodded, but when his boss walked off, he exchanged glances with Jimph. His eyes followed Harrow, who had made over to his desk, where he stopped, dubiously looking over the room. After fumbling beneath the console, the captain produced something that he concealed immediately in his uniform. One last glance over the crew and he was out. A collective sigh crossed the room. Some started to chat, others giggled. "I wish I was out like the settlers," said Ed. 2. Captain Harrow dragged himself down a dim corridor of mauve floral carpet, providing much-needed padding for the captain's infirm walk. Pictures of mythical princesses from around the hallway vibrated in Harrow's aviators as he slowed down to rest and brood. Crowns, magically formed from the stars, nebulae aligning to the shape of the tiara, as well as shots of tourists in spacesuits having jolly times on foreign worlds could all be found here. One picture showed an oversized lady in a tinfoil bikini, clinging to a cold one while gawking at the miracles of the universe. Another depicted a man pointing at a magnificent black hole eclipse, holding a smoke in one hand and a baby in the other. There was a shot of a young Harrow grinning in front of the tiara at her christening, his skin fair, his eyes out and handsome. "Goom," the heart hailed. "I observe you are much better today, Captain." "When duty calls, what's a man to do?" replied Harrow. "Oh my, I believe I felt sorry for you, just a little." "Has it been 25 years already?" "Nearly. Only one more day to go." "How exciting for you." Harrow's head bobbed down like he'd nodded off. After long seconds, he continued. "Well, good luck," he told the system with a warm smile. "Raise the lights, would you?" There was a pause. "I suggest the crown jewel exploration craft for the experience of a lifetime," intoned the semi-sentient machine. "Only $5.99 at the concierge." "None of that," Harrow barked firmly. After another long silence, the heart replied, "Why don't you remove your sunglasses instead?" "I am the captain. Override 4711. The lights rose. "See, that wasn't so bad," Harrow said soothingly. "I've raised the lights 1,000 times. Why can't you people install switches?" The captain ignored the computer's suggestion and gyrated onward, presently reaching a solid metal hatch, retrofitted during the tiara's conversion. Harrow briefly lifted his aviators, allowing a machine to scan his iris. A powerful thud cut through the silence. A bolt moved, and the lock opened. The captain grabbed its handles, was about to swing inside when the lights suddenly flickered. Harrow spun around, his gaze fixed on something down the corridor. The captain's grip weakened, and he stumbled toward it. 5 parallel lines, Harrow thought as he ran his trembling hand across the scratches he'd found in the wall. Down a crossing hall, he spotted yet more streaks. A claw? He hailed the ship's heart. "Computer!" The speakers stayed silent. "Heart!" he repeated more sternly. There was no response. Hesitantly, Harrow made his way forward. As expected, the second mark resembled the first. 5 diagonal lines. They have longer thumbs than we do. He followed a trail of scratches down the corridor to a large double-glass door and glimpsed at the world beyond. Around him sat the bland decor of a service hallway. Ahead lay a Florentine mall with markets for daily needs, cafes for leisure, and shops for trinkets. None of the stores were open, and there were no people, with only emergency illumination casting puddles of light here and there. Harrow rolled his eyes at a sensor and stepped through the opening door. This time they won't be laughing. They'll see. 3. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the crew commingled. Chairs were clustered, headsets were disconnected, and stations were unmanned. Some lounged while others chatted or played games. Ed was the only one still manning his terminal, focusing intensely on unwrapping a candy bar. Jimph broke the silence. "You gonna stay?" "At my desk?" Ed replied without looking up. "No. Depends." "On what?" "If the old man sticks," Jimph said, smirking as he took a deep drag from his joystick. "Can you imagine spending the rest of your life around him?" "On the world," Ed mumbled while munching his prize. He tossed the wrapper into an ejection hatch, where it was sucked out to join the galaxy's great garbage gyro 5,000 years later. Someone hailed from the rear. "Engineer Ed, we can't start without you." "Duty calls," Ed told Jimph, and he joined his colleagues at the rear for a game of tossing digital cards they called bridge. This had amused them for years, as the card surfaces could be changed. That was until everyone began hacking the controller. Although this temporarily added an interesting component of strategy, it rendered the game senseless in the long run. In despair, they had asked the Heart to install an unbreakable firewall, and it did. Of course, some had secretly tried their luck at the code, while others attempted to persuade the computer to grant them access. For well over a year, no one had succeeded. Ed suspiciously eyed the half-circle of colleagues. There was Pilot Sheena, Intern Fu, Second Officer Wiley, as well as Kamo Utah. "Nobody's cheating, I assume," he said, smirking. They all shook their heads. Some grinned. Ed squinted. "Ed, people say this is your last trip." Wiley, a man with an enormous forehead, said. Ed looked uncomfortable. He wasn't that old. "Haven't decided yet." "Did you buy property?" Wiley wouldn't let go. "Yeah, we get discounts, you know," Ed mumbled. "Bought the equivalent of Hatton for the price of my apartment on Marcon." "Colony deals are good, but you don't meet the other settlers until there's no escape," Wiley said with a dirty smirk. "I know they screen them and all, but it could be a load of assholes. Some always fall through." "Is that why you're here?" inquired Sheena with a brazen grin. Wiley looked for trash to throw, but quickly gave up, resolving to use the energy to flick his last card. It landed perpendicular to the wall. A perfect throw. The others stared at his achievement. "You're talking about this settling stuff to distract us." "Uncover the card," called Ed. Wiley grinned. He knew he'd won. Spending endless boring nights, he had cracked the firewall. He was the king of cheaters. What triumph! Wiley wasn't sure how to judge Ed's smug grin. He had just reached down to uncover his card when it happened. A jolt shot through the ship, pushing and toppling the crew. Trash and tools dropped from the desks, sending the cleaner bot into a frenzy to collect things fresh and old. Everyone was muddled, coughing and gagging. The hyperdrive for once ran smoothly. Ed spoke first. "Was that real?" Wiley was quick to grab his lucky card, still face down, and maneuvered it into his pocket. "Yeah, felt like an earthquake." "The ship didn't move. Nothing moved," Annie declared from the front. "One of those extra hard gravity waves." "Who knows?" Wiley said, suppressing a gag. Sheena brushed the event off first. As an ex-fighter pilot, a little gravity shock meant nothing to her. "What does Terabella look like anyway?" she asked. "Is it weird with purple blobby plants and stuff?" "You didn't see the brochure?" asked Ed. "Didn't bother. They do an excellent job with the landscaping. You get utilities, too. Ore and oxygen. Some even have security nearby. The land is zoned, though," Ed explained. "You need to know in advance if you want to farm, trade, or mine." "Did you hear that planet Perron had reported extraterrestrials?" Sheena asked. "They were high on fumes," Wiley said dismissively. "Perhaps," she nodded sideways. "When the Marines arrived, the aliens had fled into the ground. or so they said. Some say those very tunnels leaked the gases that made the settlers hallucinate. In the end, no one was able to explain what had happened. Apropos hostile life forms barely resembling humans, Ed interjected. Captain's been gone for a while. Should we check on him? Leave him, barked Fu. He is the captain, Ed said. Well, there's always mutiny. I'll go, Jimph declared from the back. Me too. Sheena rushed up and saluted. Gentlemen. 4. Harrow navigated the rich, full quarter-inch carpet and its falling star theme with ease, taking turns past shops selling everything from gum to kitchenware. Yet it took the captain many concentrated minutes to scrutinize floors, ceilings, and walls for further clues, as they remained latent unless he set his mind to them. Shrouding their traces they are, Harrow thought. After gape-walking for a while, he suddenly found his footsteps crunching and stopped. The ground was littered with the remains of a candy store window. There was no sign of anyone around. Harrow froze, even his breathing. He could hear the hyperdrive vibrating the bits of glass. I liked candy once, he thought. When the captain entered, the lights flickered. Have they been on? The thought was still forming in Harrow's head when it struck. A shelf he'd just passed toppled and crashed to the ground, scattering candy in an irritating clatter. Harrow rubbed his shoulder knowingly, intently listening to the bouncing gumballs until even the last one ceased and silence returned. By an impulse apparent only to him, he abruptly thawed, and with an atypical energy rushed out of the store. He hurried toward the rear of the mall, disregarding the scratch marks he now saw everywhere. Another hatch lay ahead. Harrow opened it, and once more the lights flashed as the metal swung open, revealing a spiked creature squatting inside. Harrow stared. The thing stared back. Computer? The ship's heart didn't answer. Harrow closed his eyes, counted to 3, and reopened them. The being was gone. They have achieved teleportation. Harrow brushed his feet on the pea-green doormat, then entered the tight space of the decon lock. Harrow gaped out of the chamber before sealing it. Nothing gaped back. How else could it vanish? His mind couldn't find an answer, and thus occupied itself with hooking the captain to the hemodialysis. After a beeping countdown, pressurized powder shot from the ceiling, past his body, and out through openings in the floor. The storm blew off his aviators while granules scrubbed every bit of dirt away from Harrow, all the while extinguishing microbes, bacteria, and, in Harrow's case, streptococcus from under his fingernails. It was loud and opaque. This is when they'll get me. Blinded, hooked on the transfusion and helpless. After mere seconds, a hatch on the opposing side disengaged. Harrow pushed it and stared into a thick darkness, carpeted a forest green. He contemplated the world of towers ahead, filled with naked, unmoving loads. This section was filled with humans, thousands of them, each outfitted with pipes and hoses leading to hidden cleaning and nourishing mechanisms. The robotically attached protuberances were designed to meet vital entry and exit points, yet every so often the automaton connecting them had failed, causing the subject to wither. The unending flow saturated the air with an incessant whisper. Harrow's steps were hurried, his eyes eagerly scanning the shelves. The damp expanse felt like a greenhouse, and he wheezed, wiping sweat from his brows. His eyes finally met a target, and the captain expeditiously made his way over to an open shelf spot. Not minding the brown stain, he slumped into the space, exhaling, then reaching into his jacket, producing what he'd lifted from his desk earlier. 5. The crew had abandoned their game of casting cards in favor of tossing trash. They'd tethered the cleaning robot, laughing as it zoomed around, only to fall and roll around like a turned beetle. An alarm from his console caught Ed's attention. He tried hard to ignore it, but the incessant pinging wouldn't end. Critical, I'm sure, he muttered, rising. The machine exploited the momentary line, slackening for a dash toward its Walnook charging station. Get it! Wiley was quick to snatch the silicon slave, but when he looked up, he found Ed still glued to his screen. So, what's happening? No issues with the ship, right? No, replied Ed, only half listening. Something more interesting than that. Wiley ceased grinning and sat down. He was a cheater, a fool, and an ass, but no rookie. What could be interesting out here? Genuine intrigue had bubbled up in him. See for yourself? Ed conjured an image up to the dome. It was a view of empty space, no different from what was visible outside already. Wiley squinted and thought he could make out a tiny dot at the center of the projection. He shrugged. "I'll zoom in," Ed said, and the speck expanded, becoming a planet, blue and brown. The rest of the crew became aware, and everyone stared at the enlargement. "So what is this?" Wiley asked, breaking the trance the crew had fallen into. "Asteroid? Big one, huh?" "You'll understand in a sec," Ed replied. The round object grew. It was now easy to make out. Shouts rose. "Is that—" The crew tried to understand what they were looking at. The dot had become a sphere. It was clearly a planet, blue, brown, and white, complete with continents, clouds, and frozen land masses. "That real?" Annie muttered. "That's Earth!" Fu shrieked. "No, it isn't!" Wiley snorted. "Out here!" Ed went over the data. "There's no system." He rubbed his eyes like that was going to fix it. "It's Earth, all by itself out here. How the heck did it pass us? We've been traveling away from it for years." Wiley was annoyed to even entertain this thought. The veins on his forehead bulged while his brain worked overtime. "Halt the ship," he grumbled. Ed stared at him from the corner of his eyes. "Gonna be costing the Earth," he said quietly. "Captain's not on the bridge. I'm in command. I say stop the fucking ship," Wiley barked. "Aye." Ed reached into his control ellipses. Before long, the ceaseless vibration of the drive vanished. "Hail Earth Control," Wiley ordered. Annie rushed to her station, flipped on her headset, and began babbling. After a few seconds, she shook her head. "Do you pick up any radio chatter?" The girl shook once more. "Then it's not Earth," Wiley stated matter-of-factly. He was now sober and in command. "Sure looks like it, though. There's the Americas, Africa, Eurasia, and the sands of Antarctica," Ed mumbled. "Something terrible must have happened," Annie said, rocking nervously. Wiley disregarded her. Suddenly, Fu jumped up. "What is that?" He pointed at the planet's edge where a thin, red crest shone. "Ed, zoom in!" Ed enlarged the area around the red line. It showed a slither near the planet's edge, right down an imagined longitudinal line that had turned red as if tinted while preserving all detail beneath. Ed ran the camera over the newfound mystery. "What to make of that?" Wiley pondered, his eyes busily flicking about. Suddenly, they stopped. "Ed!" He jumped up. "Move the camera back!" Not comprehending, Ed wiggled the controls. "Back where?" "Hold it right there!" Wiley shouted as the frame covered an area of space near the red. "See that?" He squinted while pointing at nothing. "A dot!" Ed enlarged the minuscule point floating next to the planet. Several people cried out simultaneously. "A ship! It's a ship!" The crew gawked in awe at the elongated red shape. "Is it extraterrestrial?" whispered Annie. "Nonsense!" "Well then, what is it? Why is Earth taking on its color? What are they doing to our planet? The ship's red, it must be hot. A ship of devils, and they're heating Terra." "We don't know that," Ed jumped in. "We don't know anything," Annie called from her console. "We're receiving a chain of pulses. Are they trying to hail or destroy us?" "High energy," the girl said as she waded through data. "I'm not sure." "Have the heart analyze it. Check if they sent a key, if it's periodic and all that," Wiley commanded. "Heart!" The room took a long, communal breath. After an eternity, the ship's heart replied. "Yes." "Analyze the pulses and determine their purpose," Wiley shouted. "Translate if possible." "That'll take a long time," the system replied. "Do it anyway," Wiley hissed. "All right." The computer went quiet. Then, after only a few seconds, the intelligence said, "It states destruction danger or something. Are they threatening or warning us? We mustn't trust them. They're the aggressors." "Great, so we don't understand what they want, but they know we're here. An emergency, perhaps?" Wiley rubbed his protruding forehead. "Ed, show some close-ups. Let's see what's happening on the surface." Utah chimed in. "Zoom in to the North American West. I've been there a few times." "Guide me," said Ed, reaching back into his controls. "A little more west. West. North. Good. Now go to 100 meters. The screen showed a mountain range, some roads, and a small town among metallic structures. Utah took a good look. She peered with much concentration, then shook her head. "That's not right at all." She leaped to the screen. This flyway doesn't exist. The town is in the wrong place, and I could swear that mountain range wasn't around either. How long since you've been there? Wiley asked cautiously. 25 years, Utah answered. There was an awkward silence. You think I can't remember a mountain range? Utah shrieked, sensing her colleague's doubt. I'm telling you that's not the town I went to. Perhaps the lack of sunlight is distorting its features, Ed suggested. Did anyone notice human activity? Any activity? No one had. Ed drawled. Then where is everybody? 6. Down in the Tiara's bowels, Jimph and Sheena navigated a tangle of corridors. The boy enthusiastically followed the captain's trail while Sheena lagged behind, sighing frequently and heavily. He's in the mall again, she finally said with infinite boredom while watching Jimph examine a clue. But the boy's ardor didn't change. Aha! He exclaimed, pointing at some sticky handprints. Sheena rolled her eyes. Can you be quiet? She punched his arm. I enjoy the silence. Jimph stared at her, vexed and disappointed. Sheena produced a little tin box filled with putty. Care for a lobe lifter? She asked while rolling zonk between her fingers. Be less boring? Under the tongue, Jimph replied, surprising himself. Why not find Harrow later? Sheena suggested as she massaged the putty into Jimph's mouth. Knot was all over her face. Let's get lost and fool around. Not yet, Jimph mumbled while licking her fingers. Captain? He made out another sticky handprint. The two continued through the unending monotony of hallways when the humming of the engine was cut by a jingle. Welcome, travelers! Why not try our free boinking classes? Hart, cut ads! Sheena yelled, and the announcement ceased. They giggled. Then suddenly from ahead came Sheena and Jimph. They froze. Their other selves did likewise. Incredulously, the boy moved his arm only to see his opposite do the same. The pair slowly stepped forward. Sheena swayed from side to side, gyrating her hips, and the other girl closely reflected her motions. She giggled. Oh, it's the glass doors! They were at the mall. Told you he went here? No, you... Yes? Jimph had some trouble getting his wobbly head in position for the retina scan. After finally making the mark, the doors slid open. Sheena gazed like a newborn. This place is so glorious, she said, seeming oddly touched as they traversed the alleys of make-believe. Imagine being a queen, striding on green carpets every day and being magnificent. She let her hand run over the fake stucco. They reached the Piazza del David, its centerpiece being a statue of the same, fully dressed. Sheena stared at David's crotch. Sometimes I think we'll never arrive, be on this ship forever. Her gaze went blank. Can you imagine? Her eyes suddenly appeared as though they had only now registered the dumpy, fake Italian interior for the first time. This? Forever? Jimph stopped and turned, his eyebrows raised. I'd crash the ship into some planet. End us, grant relief, she continued. You know the thought experiment with the falling tree in the forest? Does it happen if nobody sees it? Jimph answered wearily. Just record it. What if no one viewed the recording? Imagine all things in the universe needing computation and storage because someone might point a sensor at them. That'd be a lot of storage, Jimph said. Assume we crashed into a planet but no one found us for millennia. Our debris would have to be kept in the universe's memory. Unless the God computer had already calculated everything that would ever happen. But if our crashing had no effect on anyone, the computer could delete us immediately before it even happened. It would hit remove as soon as it was clear that we served no purpose. She swallowed. That's a scary thought. Sheena realized that Jimph had strolled off. You're most in danger when alone, she murmured, then shuddered and rushed to catch up. She found Jimph inspecting the smashed candy storefront. That's gonna cost him, she commented, dragging patterns into the debris with her feet. If he did it, Jimph said. Captain! Jimph yelled into the store, waiting for a reply. When none came, he spoke into the air. Hart! There was no response either. Nobody gives a fuck anymore! The boy shook his head. He went on to assess the debris-strewn ground. No great detective was needed to see the footsteps Harrow had left stomping through the mess. They grabbed some candy and made to the lock. When Jimph unfastened the heavy door of the sterilization chamber, the two were greeted by a rack of hoses, much resembling the creature Harrow had seen earlier. They ignored it and prepared for the dialysis. Soon their veins bulged while pumps labored to cleanse their fluids. Well sterilized, they headed into the humidity. Jimph yelled into the moist murk, but his calls were answered only by the whispering liquids. Sheena's eyes, meanwhile, jumped nervously across the bodies. There was no right place to lay them, no spot that wasn't unnerving to her. I've worked on settlers before, but this stuff still creeps me out. She stopped and petted a hibernating dog, then regarded a man in his 50s. Lewd returned to her face. Imagine doing it in front of 1,000 staring eyes. A deep moan rose in reply. Sheena grinned. "What's that?" Jimph shouted from afar. He hadn't heard any of her nonsense. The groan intensified. Sheena's eyes shifted to the gawking figure next to her. After swallowing hard, she took to her heels. She discovered Jimph kneeling in an empty bay, assisting a moaning Harrow who had slouched into a leaky sack-like position. The boy took the commander's pulse, even pulling up his eyelids. Harrow's eyeballs stared blankly. Jimph shook his head and sighed. Suddenly, the captain twitched and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Hurrah! And up she rises!" "Crap, I knew it," Jimph shrieked. He found an empty bottle nearby. Johnny Walker, born millennia ago and still going strong. Where did he lift this? The boy wondered to himself. What is it? Sheena asked, her eyes twinkling. It's alcohol. People used to drink it to get high. Let me try it. She reached for the bottle. Jimph jerked back. Stick with Lobolifters. This stuff destroys your body. Suddenly, the captain thrust forward, seized Jimph by the shoulders, and screamed straight into the boy's face. We have monsters aboard! 7. The alien flight deck convulsed with fluctuating shapes. Amorphous shadows permeated the murky cockpit, drawn by fluorescent instruments and a strong red glow outside. Mechanism and apparatus equally cramped the space, with its only decoration being a few poorly framed pictures of the pilot's fiery home planet. The air was gloomy, and so was the crew. Among the confusion of red, 3 heaving shapes glided about. They appeared agitated and were in discussion near a display where an X-ray of Earth revealed immense, cavernous spaces inside the planet. Canals connected the hollows that resembled subterranean insect burrows, one being made over to a console. The others shifted their attention to a screen with an enlargement of the planet's surface. It showed landscapes, structures, and cities, much like the pictures of their home world. Hong Koch Koneo Arems. The creature steamed out of its 13 orifices as it spoke. When it had finished, another blubbering being undulated itself. Karinya Taplan! In response, a fellow creature flowed forward. Traguto Malan! It uttered with a suspicious tone. Meldar Tahak! Replied the first approvingly. The shapes shifted toward a port to behold Earth. It was a red ball of fire. Continents and topology had little in common with man's home planet anymore. No clouds were visible in the scorched atmosphere, with just a sliver of blue remaining along the planet's edge. A jumble of technical overlays appeared. The data excited the creatures greatly, and they pointed their dendrites at the human ship floating near the blue crescent of the planet. 8. The Tiara's crew, meanwhile, stared unmovingly at the unmoving red ship. All was so still that Ed had to check if they hadn't plunged into a nanogularity. Can I leave? Fu suddenly asked, thrusting his colleagues out of their stupor. Shift's over. No! Wiley shrieked. How can you play happy-zappy when your homeworld is at stake? Ed ignored the outburst. We must fight them. But how without weapons? Ram them, Utah suggested, but Wiley quickly dismissed the thought. Too risky. We could make off, Annie suddenly said, and pretend nothing happened? Deliver the settlers, then return. They're terraforming Earth now. It'll be too late. Why not wake the passengers, find supplies on Earth, and rescue as many as possible? There's an army right there. Wiley nodded. Not a bad idea. Shouts from Ed's desk cut off the discussion. It's moving! The crew snapped back to the overhead projection and gawked as the red ship advanced toward Earth. What are these devils up to now? The monitors showed organic lines leading from the alien vessel to the planet. That's how they towed Terra. Their ship is seriously small for the job, though. We know nothing about their technology. They closely watched the red ship's progress, but instead of the planet shifting, the alien vessel advanced toward it until presently vanishing behind Earth's horizon. "Let's go after them." "And hit a fleet back there?" Wiley slammed his fist on the console, shooting cracked polymers into the room. "We can't sit idle while they're raping our world." He paced. "We're landing." He slammed his fist again, but avoided breaking gear this time. "Everybody take stations." Frantic murmuring roused the cockpit. Manic data passed the screens. The glass dome became peppered with vectors and grids. "Initiate settler sunrise?" "Yes, banks 1 through 4 first, 30-minute delay," Wiley commanded, hand in pocket, rubbing his lucky card. The planet grew to fill their field of view, and in no time, space was no longer visible. "Entry atmosphere in 5, 4, 3... "I don't read topo," Annie remarked. "What do you mean?" Wiley asked, shooting an annoyed glance at the girl. "I'm not sure. Maybe something broke during the shock wave. Be cautious when picking the site." "Okay. Utah, head to North America Halibut 5. Outside, the features of mountains, rivers, and forests grew. The ship descended swiftly, yet the crew and bridge barely moved. "This is the smoothest landing I've ever done," Utah said, looking around in disbelief. "No turbulence, no shaker tracers, nothing." Annie nodded, first scanning her screen, then scanning the outside. "We should be in the clouds by now, but they're still beneath us. We're under 10 kilometers." She tapped her screen. "But look at the surface." Earth's horizon lay before them, yet mountain ranges, forests, or cities didn't reach above it. Everything that made Earth existed, but it was flat. "It's the perspective. It doesn't match the angle." "It all looks so familiar," Annie said pensively. "Of course it does," barked Wiley. "Altitude under 1. Initiating flare. Deploying wings. No effect. We're not slowing. There's no atmosphere. How is that possible? Give extra engine to flare." "Aye." The ship's mighty landing gear deployed, and among a hurricane of fire, the Tiara once again touched the Earth's soil. Instead of finding a firm footing, though, it continued to descend, sinking into the soft ground. Ominous creaks reverberated through the hull before the slanted ship stabilized and came to rest. The crew clenched, bracing for an event, but none came. Ed surveyed the engines. "With so much fire, we don't need red aliens to scorch our planet." "Goom. Picturesque this world, isn't it?" the ship's heart suddenly proclaimed. "What is that supposed to mean?" Wiley had no appetite for the computer's passive aggressiveness. "Thinks itself an artist, that machine." He ran to the glass and examined the outside. "I don't see any invaders." "Seems like they didn't detect us," said Ed. "Quick, Utah Fu, prepare for exit," Wiley said. Fu grinned. "Do I get a gun?" 9. A goat was chasing a dog, a cat was chasing a chicken, and a boy ran after all of them. Quiet and darkness had vanished from the hold as hundreds of settlers had woken and were out and about. Jimph, Sheena, and Harrow were surrounded by a roar of activity, so much of it that they had fled into a dark corner. The majority of those awakened were naked, though some had ripped floor and wall coverings to wrap themselves in. Families began to stake shelf space as homes, or were engaged in arguments over rugs they wanted for walls. Suddenly, the ship's heart sounded. "Your worries will soon be melting away." The uplifting message fell on deaf ears as Sheena busied herself plundering the sleeping captain's pockets, and Jimph had turned sideways to suspiciously inconspicuously talk into his communicator. "Ed, hundreds of settlers are waking," he whispered, "and it feels like the engines are winding down." "Yeah, we found Earth," Ed's voice replied. "But it's been invaded by aliens, and now we're landing to do battle with the settlers as our army." Jimph turned away and spoke even more softly. "The captain is talking to aliens again, and now you." "This time he's on to something," came the reply from the bridge. "On board." "I see," replied Ed. There was an awkward pause. "We're sending Utah and Fu outside for a reconnaissance mission." Jimph nervously eyed the unruly crowd. "What are we supposed to tell these folks?" "Why, the truth," came Ed's surprising answer. "Right. They will be very open to reason," replied the boy, watching two men loudly argue over an old mat. "Make them understand that these are serious circumstances, but that we're in control," said Ed. Before Jimph could answer, shouts for the crew arose. The settlers had spotted them, hunched away, and approached the two youths and their comatose commander. Jimph rose to an imposing posture, tightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and addressed the crowd. "Dear settlers, may I have your attention, please?" he shouted. The mob calmed. "You must all be groggy," he said, clearing his throat. "Ah, welcome back. Now, we're not on Terabella just yet. We're, back on Earth." The masses hushed as the news sunk in. Jimph let them ponder, then continued. "There is strong evidence that our world is under attack by extraterrestrial invaders, and we must ask all able-bodied male passengers to join our interplanetary strike force." Out of nowhere, the ship's speakers rasped with a chuckle. "Interplanetary strike force?" The ship's heart giggled, a functionality it had only recently discovered. "That's gold!" The colonists were less amused. "How? We have no weapons. We don't even have clothes!" Someone shouted. "I didn't pay 5,000 bitbucks to see my wife naked." "We will procure supplies on Earth," explained Jimph, "as soon as we have located them." The crowd didn't buy it. More shouting rose. Aggression hung low and heavy. The boy took a step back. "What about my parents? I demand to see my family. I must see my horse." "That can be arranged at an appropriate time," said Jimph, unsettlingly rowing with his arms. "You know our slogan, don't settle for less." A grim man stepped forward. "I want to speak to the commander, not a boy." "Absolutely." Jimph pointed at the drooling Harrow. "He's right here." All eyes shifted to the captain, who sat hunched like his bones had melted. The crowd eyed the unimposing figure suspiciously. "Is he dead?" "You wish," Jimph said, coughing nervously. "But no, he's resting." At that moment, Harrow woke. His eyes passed over the crowd incredulously. "Are they real?" Before anyone could answer, he decided they were and straightened himself into as much of a commandery pose as his feebleness allowed. He righted his hat, took a deep breath, and then roared from the top of his lungs, "We have aliens aboard!" Instant panic set in. People rushed in all directions and tripped in every which way. No one knew which bearing was best, but any place seemed better than where they were. Jimph and Sheena snuck off toward the hatch. Their escape didn't go unnoticed. "They're bolting!" a settling wench shrieked. Jimph dashed after Sheena into the room. "What about the captain?" "Screw him!" Sheena yelled and slammed the door. Outside, indistinct shouts rose, followed by banging and pounding. "If you don't open, we will!" The thudding grew louder. Jimph caught his breath and then addressed the mob over the PA system. "Please, everyone calm down. You will be safest right here in the cargo hold. We will update you as developments unfold." He turned away from the mic. "Man, on these budget trips, you get the bottom of the barrel, settlers." The two fugitives exchanged worried glances before calling the ship's heart. "Computer, seal off this area." "It's already taken care of," said the system. "Woo, thanks," Jimph said before turning to the inner hatch to open it. It was locked. "As I said, you are securely sealed in," chimed the heart. "Why do we need to be confined?" Jimph didn't wait for an answer and called the bridge. "Ed, open 12B. "That doesn't open remotely," came the reply. "Then come down here." "When I have a chance." There was a pause. "We're kind of busy saving the planet." 10. Fu and Utah rushed through a tangle of unending, zigzagging rails on their way to the exterior hatch. All of the ship's facilities had once been attractions, and the Miracle Expedition portal was no different. Screens everywhere stubbornly played commercials for the audience of two. "Do not miss the wonderment of extraterrestrial exploration," a speaker hollered. "Roam foreign planets and enjoy a complimentary beverage in absolute comfort and complete safety." The screens showed tourists giddily sucking on a curly straw inside their spacesuit. "And, as always, all of our worlds are guaranteed alien-free." The crew ignored the notes and skipped past the rails. The heart chimed in. "Dear guests, to survey the wonders of this world comfortably, I suggest the Tiara's crown jewel exploration vessel. Purchase your tickets in the mall." The explorers-to-be stared at the speaker. "The heart sure is losing it," Utah said finally, eyebrows raised. Fu nodded. "Yeah, it's the whole conscience transition thing." They arrived at a hatch fitted with an oversized, submarine-style wheel. Utah disregarded the decoration and punched a hidden control to activate the door. A dive siren came on. She rolled her eyes and rushed into the airlock. After no time, Utah had squeezed into her exosuit, latched the helmet, and pressurized. She was ready to exit, meet any hardship the outside would throw at her. Fu was only half-dressed and had turned his back on her for a mighty long time. She rebuckled a clasp with an extra loud snap. "Fu, you ready?" Following a long pause, the boy replied, "Not yet." He fumbled something Utah could not see, then muttered, "I'm programming the mission computer." "Mission computer?" She yanked him around. A bit buddy slipped out of Fu's hands and onto the floor. Utah fumed. "Did I just wait 20 minutes for this shit?" She angrily smacked the door release. The portal flew open, and Fu got sucked out to tumble across the ground like trash in the wind. When he finally caught himself, the boy quickly finished his suit and checked his device. He wasn't pleased. "I lost 500 because of your crap," he screeched over the comm. "That's unfortunate, my friend. I could have died too." "Sadly, you didn't. That's gonna have consequences. What you gonna do, boy? Call the police?" He did nothing. "We're only wasting time," Fu finally muttered. "They're all gone." Utah stopped dead. "Do you know what you're saying? Don't you have friends and family here?" He had no good answer. "So, you okay?" she finally asked. "Yeah, ground is soft." Fu looked up at the ship towering above him. Its skids had sunk into terra infirma and looked like it would at any moment roll over and crush him. The Tiara didn't move, though, and Fu's attention turned to his surroundings. For all he could see in the dark, there was much of nothing. They had landed on a level plain with only sparse, shallow hills breaking the horizon. Smoke began to cloud his vision. Fu looked down. His glove sat in a puddle, fuming from below. "Crap!" He jerked back. Other parts of his suit had started to discolor. An alarm sounded. "Shit! Shit!" While Fu jumped about, slapping smoking holes, the suit's self-healing activated and sealed them. Utah came running. "Don't touch anything." "How can anybody have survived without oxygen?" Fu mumbled, now glad he'd closed his helmet. "Perhaps they fled into sealed structures underground," Utah replied as she began to walk off. "Who knows?" She activated her lights and then made her way toward a hill that lay about 100 yards ahead. Fu rushed to catch up. They were soon enveloped by heavy darkness, though everything was calm and quiet. Utah stopped to view the unearthly starscape above. "Hello?" Fu called out through his helmet. "Shut up!" She punched his arm. "The entire fucking invader army is going to be upon us." "Like they haven't seen the ship already." "Maybe not. Nobody here so far." She resisted her impulse to punch him again. "Now be quiet and follow." They reached a man-sized stick that rose out of the ground like a debranched tree trunk. "Why do you think they torched the place?" Fu raised his hand to reach for the gnarly surface. Utah caught his arm. "Don't touch anything!" she hissed. "Perhaps to form it in the image of their own world. They're done here and are now burning the other side." Utah pointed her flashlight at the horizon. There were other protrusions, but it was hopeless to make anything out from afar. "Get up that hill and see what's behind it," she commanded. Fu eyed the not-too-distant obstacle with contempt. "Do I have to?" "Yes. I will inspect this tree trunk and catch up. We have limited time." The boy shrugged and walked off. Utah returned her attention to the stick. Its surface resembled tree bark, but it had a rubbery quality to it, not scorched at all. Suddenly, the boy screamed, "Utah!" She jerked around and nearly slipped. "Got ping-ping from the casino!" He snorted. "Want another 500? He thumbs-upped. Utah's face contorted and her eyes rolled. "Man, it's my lucky day!" the boy hollered, then turned and continued toward the hill with renewed enthusiasm. Utah watched him walk on quietly, making sure he didn't fuck up again, then returned to scrutinizing the scabby surface of the stick. It seemed to vibrate, or did it sway? There was no wind, she felt sure. Utah glanced back at Fu. The bouncing circle of his light had nearly vanished. "Wait for me before you pass over," she said over the radio. "Yeah," came the answer. It didn't appear like he was stopping. Getting ready to go after him, Utah shone her flashlight onto the ground. The surrounding surface refracted her light in a vivid pattern, and she followed it, staring down, realizing that the hue and saturation changed. She memorized the colors as she passed, white to green to blue. The surface was unlike anything she'd ever seen, like dinosaur skin with its polygonal recursive structure. Was this rock? It was too soft for that. She stopped and knelt to investigate the cells. The faceted elements were colorful, not on the surface, but beneath it. There was more. Utah moved in as closely as her suit allowed. Tiny mountain ranges, rivers, forests, and clouds could be seen among the iridescent surface. Impossible! Utah knew she had seen the scenery before. She hailed Fu. "You got to see this. Get back here." There was no answer. His light was gone. Of course, the idiot had passed the hill and brought about a radio blackout. She rushed after him. "Fu!" Her repeated calls went unanswered. Utah knew there was a good reason for him not answering, and it wasn't an electronics issue. These radios had a range of 500 miles, vastly beyond any horizon, and would penetrate entire mountain ranges with a battery life of 200 years. When she reached the opposite side of the hill, there was no sign of her colleague, but right away, a buried, angular form stood out. It was clearly a ship, not human. When Utah flashed her light about, she noticed a twitch in the hillside to the left. "Are you stuck?" Then she saw Fu. Only a single foot poked out of the rubbery hill he was immersed in. The soft mass undulated around him, his limbs bobbing along lifelessly. The inside of the fleshy mound was covered in round, sharp-toothed maws, salivating while scrubbing away the boy's flesh. Utah's visor fogged. This real? She slammed her helmet to force out the zonk, but when she finished, the obscenely smacking mouths were still at work. Yellow liquids ran from the undulating wad. Mesmerized by the sight, Utah froze for a moment, then suddenly turned, gagged, and began running toward the glow of the tiara. Her fogged vision glared with the ship's lights. She could see nothing. After hitting one of the scaly sticks head-on, Utah no longer saw the stars above but her own. The pole flexed back, the ground shot up, and a thick blanket of flesh engulfed her. 11. They aren't taking it well. Wiley apprehensively tapped the screen in front of him and the lucky card in his pocket. He stared at the rioting crowd in the settling bay. Some guests had sunk into makeshift huts, while others sought their luck by ramming bolted doors. "What a slum," he murmured. "I can't get a hold of our ground team," Ed said, shoving Wiley out of his daze. The temporary captain rubbed his forehead. "Can't think." His glance returned to the rioters who had just broken down a door. "They're looting the mall." "Good, that'll keep 'em busy," said Ed while scanning for the crew outside. "Are Jimf and Sheena out yet?" Wiley asked. "They're still in the lock." Ed looked up. "Where's our commandant?" "Don't know, don't care." Goom. The ship's heart came on. "Lose yourself in a new world. Have your mind melt away and sample our 300 Venusian drafts." Wiley stared at the speaker, eyebrows raised. "That thing is losing it." "So am I," admitted Ed. "We can't have thousands of people rioting on the ship," Wiley finally said. Ed went back to his station. "I'll handle it." He uncapped an immense button and hit it hard with his flat hand, initiating an emergency lockdown. All of the corridors were sealed with heavy fire doors, separating the rioters into mall and storage areas. Some panicked and rushed through to whichever side they thought was better. Once the cordoning was completed, Ed took to a microphone and addressed the mob. "Listen, folks, please listen." There was an instant calm among the horde. Ed continued. "You will be temporarily sealed into the marketplace and cargo areas. You are perfectly safe. We will update you with news and procedures very shortly." He watched the captives shout and gesture, silently, as there were no mics on their end. Bing bong, bing bong, bing bong. "They found the service button," Wiley grinned. "They sure did," replied Ed, looking for ways to silence the thing. Wiley massaged his temples. "Okay, the landing crew. Do we not know where they are?" "No, and they're running out of oxygen." Wiley picked up a pair of binoculars and searched the surface around the tiara. They couldn't have walked far in such a short time. Ed joined him at the glass. They saw no one. A sudden jerk shoved them out of their reflections. A bang, followed by dull creaking, sent the ship into a heavier list. Ed's cup slid off the table and met a spectacular end on the floor, where the garbage robot spitefully took care of it. Ed was quick to strap himself into his flight seat. "Shit, she's shifting!" "Fire the thrusters, short bursts!" Wiley shouted. "That could fry Fu and Utah." The ship rattled and groaned but came to a rest, leaning more heavily now. Ed checked on the settlers. They were going nuts. "Crap, crap, crap!" Wiley tried to pace but bowed. Too leaning, too laborious. The trash bot slid by him and shattered against the wall. "Must think." He reverted his attention to the outdoors. Ed, see that dark spot back there? Ed rose. I do. Maybe they're hiding in... that? He pointed the ship's camera at the speck. It's a structure of sorts. A splotchy image appeared on the screen. Ed focused. Finally, something that's not flat. Looks like a spacer, Wiley said. Ed nodded. Not human, I don't think. The image cleared up, and the two men beheld an elegantly edged cruiser made of a crimson iridescent material. The invaders! Wiley nervously sat, rose, and then sat again. It's ruined, observed Ed. But that's good. It's destroyed. We won. Wiley suddenly jumped. There! Another one! Zoom in! Ed did, and presently the screen displayed a fragmented and half-sunk ship with an exterior greatly different from the first. Instead of being sharply edged, this one was round and blobby, not red but blue. The veins on Wiley's temples pulsed as confused blood flowed around his head. Doesn't look like it was made by the red aliens. Who knows what different technologies they use? Man, is this real? Crap, still no trace of Fu in Utah, no sign of anyone at all. The hull resonated from the pounding settlers. This old tub won't take the strain forever, said Wiley, and fell silent. After a few seconds, his face changed from hopeless to resolute. Let's get out of here. We can't just leave, Ed concluded matter-of-factly. They're dead, Wiley mumbled, containing the dirty words as much as possible. Ed stared at his colleague in disbelief. You don't know that. We have a responsibility toward the settlers, Wiley declared. Ed had no reply. The commander-in-charge shot a closing argument. This place is a death trap. I know it. The comm rang. It was Jimph. Hey, what's happening? We felt a shift. Can we release the settlers? Wiley cut in. We're leaving. A relieved smile ran over Jimph's face. What did Utah and Fu find? Nothing. False alarm, Wiley said. Ed shot him a glance. Wiley stared him down. We're moving on to Terra Bella. Roger that, Jimph replied. We're going to hold on for a bit longer. Pretty eager to hear about the aliens, though. Ed smiled and offed the comm. He hesitated. Again, the tiara jolted harshly. The men were tossed to the ground and watched as a long, thin crack formed across the glass dome. I'm going to launch us, Wiley uttered, and rushed to the liftoff console without waiting for a reply. Do you even know how? Ed asked. I saw Utah do it once, Wiley stated. He searched her console. The screen showed a zillion buttons overlaid with schematics. Computer, initiate takeoff. After a long while, the answer came. Nah, this is an emergency. Right, said the heart with extra dissonance. Wiley screamed at the air. If you don't help us, we'll pull your plug. You don't know where my plug is, came the reply. Wiley squinted angrily. They didn't. We're browsing the service manuals. He pretended to flick through data. We're very near finding your rack. The monologue got him nowhere, but he continued browsing screens like he had a clue. If Utah can do this, so can we. She studied spaceflight, graduated from Void's Academy, flew a fighter in the war. And you? Asked Ed. Bah! Wiley punched and pressed and clicked and pointed. The tiara vibrated and the engines hissed. Ed strapped in. Don't they teach this in officer school? Yes, hit all the blinking buttons, they say. There was much hissing and creaking. Wiley made his way through rows of menus before finally getting lucky. The engines fired, the ship strained, but it didn't lift off. Why don't we rise? Give more thrust. Thrust is this one, right? Ed shrugged. The engines howled sharply as Wiley hit every blinking control he could find. Suddenly, the tiara tilted heavily. Shit, that wasn't right. Do both engines simultaneously. We're stuck somehow. Stuck on a flat surface? Wiley yanked the throttle, and the ship began to shake. Ed glanced at the settling bay monitor. He saw a rolling human wave. Perhaps take it easier. Suddenly, a shadow passed over the glass outside. What little light had entered was now wiped out by a rising mound right next to the ship. What's that? Asked Ed, but Wiley was too busy to look. Bing bong! Jimph and Sheena hailed. Are we in space yet? Ed ignored them, still staring incredulously at the fleshy hills outside. Forget the easier. Give it all you've got. Wiley hesitated, then shoved both engines into full throttle. A warning rose. He overrode it. For a moment, it seemed to work. The hot exhaust seared the mound, and it twitched back. But soon the meaty material worked its way around the engines to gain an even firmer hold on the vessel. Rivets and struts gave way under sharp snaps. "Shit, it's gonna crush the frame!" Ed yelled while propping furniture onto the dome to counter the pressure. Squeals of dying metal reverberated through the ship, but Ed only had eyes for the glass. "We're not gonna make it. We're still at full throttle. Reduce! Reduce!" he shouted. Wiley did, and silence returned while the ship settled, leaning aft. Structural failures continued to resonate through the hull, and the ship moaned like a dying whale. The men twitched with every jolt. A violent gushing arose. "Hell, what is it now?" 12. Harrow woke from a powerful jolt, or was it the powerful stench? A nauseating smell dizzied his mind. He found himself piled onto a heap of cadavers in a dark corner of the hold. A child just dashed off with his aviators. Shit, he wasn't dead yet. Or was he? There, for instance, was Harrow himself prying open an electric panel. No, someone had stolen his uniform. "That won't help you," he informed the destructive thief. The man didn't pay him as much as a glance. Harrow pulled back the tarp he and the other corpses were covered with, then looked about. An insufferable murmur and stench permeated the air. "Oh, yeah?" the uniformed man now answered with a noticeable accent while tearing the panel with a mighty jolt. "And why not? The aliens controlling the ship won't allow it." "Aliens? What you mean?" Harrow's squinty eyes widened to a slit. "You didn't know?" The captain propped himself up in a commanding stance. "The ship is controlled by extraterrestrials. Why do you think the commander is down here?" "He is?" The man looked confused. "It's me. You have got no uniform. Because you stole it." The man stared down at himself, shrugged, and signaled a bunch of ruffians to the hangar-sized loading doors. "Open, Sem. I'll smash this control thing." Just then, the speakers came alive, and the ship's heart spoke. "Go outside and have all your troubles melt away." "Why is say machine saying sat?" "It's programmed to give valuable insights for an improved vacational experience," Harrow explained. "Every journey on the Tiara—" He was cut off by a deafening surge outside. "Hear that?" The captain nodded at the wall. "That's the ocean." The settler regarded the windowless facade and then the messed-up commander. "Sir are people on the bridge. I seen and heard them." Harrow smiled knowingly. "Those are their human forms. They brought us here to feed their young." "How did you get this information?" "I have been undercover among them, installed by the space police." "You a alien?" "Not anymore. I was cured." The colonizer wasn't sure what to make of this. He discussed the info with his gang. "This man says he's a cured alien and they're trying to eat us." "Aliens? Like with green antennas and shit?" "No," Harrow cut in. "They've camouflaged as humans to enslave us and bury their eggs inside our bodies." He gesticulated wildly, gathering a crowd. "Mommy, I'm scared!" A little girl clutched her mother. The captain stared at the child darkly. "You should be. Your mommy is one of them." The girl shrieked and ran off. "Seize her!" the bully yelled. Harrow rose, reinvigorated by the attention. "We must clear the path to the bridge and take command of the ship. Bring in Moa crowbars. Push them through the slit by Simal." "There are 2 aliens caught in the lock," explained the captain. "We must destroy them first. We will decide when say time comes." The mob made over to the hatch, where they were joined by men sporting brand-new crowbars. They set them into the heavy sliding door all at once, then pried at the command of their leader. After splitting a slit, a safety bolt set in, and the door wouldn't budge any further. The captain peeked through the opening. He found Jimph and Sheena making out. "See? They're mating!" shrieked Harrow. A dozen eyes gawked through the gap. "It seems they're captifs themselves. How are they trapping us? I told you the real aliens are on the bridge running the ship." Harrow grabbed one of the pry sticks and began poking his crew. "Isn't that right, you two?" "What? No! What are you talking about, you idiot?" yelled Sheena, shoving aside his crowbar. "I thought they were laying eggs." "Yes, after the insemination. The eggs will hatch, then eat their way out." The lights flickered. Or they will grow roots throughout your body, too, so that you won't be able to move." Harrow's eyes began to jump. "An alien tree will grow with alien egg fruit." The settlers considered this. "Here, these claw traces," Harrow continued. "That's how they mark their territory." He pointed at the blank wall. The settlers examined it. Harrow gawked along, the lights flashing as he did. "See? They're messing with the power," he observed. The chief ruffian looked at Harrow and then slapped his forehead. "Ah, shit, he's tweaked." The brutes shoved the captain aside and paid no more attention to the crew. "You mind-fucked asshole! You're gonna get us killed!" Sheena hissed. 13. Ed and Wiley stood with their noses on the glass. Only inches from them, corrosive ooze did away with the hull. The fatty flesh had snugly draped across the ship, its eager mouths scraping and sucking whatever the acid had weakened. "You think they're eating that?" asked Ed. Wiley twitched when a bolt in front of him bubbled and dissolved like an effervescent pill. "Who cares?" He began to pace. "Shit! Shit!" "This is not Earth," Ed remarked soberly. "No shit!" Ed studied the circular mouths. They were lined with muscles and sharp teeth. "I guess they're after us. They never finished the wrecks outside." Another bolt disappeared, this time opening a hole. A line of acid shot into the cockpit, bringing with it an acrid smoke. The two men jerked back. "Shouldn't the alloy be resilient?" "Resistant, not resilient." Ed watched as two maws fought for scraps of a girder. "You reckon these things have a mind of their own? They want to munch our fucking flesh, and we must destroy them, all I care about." "Maybe we can feed them trash?" Wiley gawked at Ed as if he were a madman. "I wonder if they're part of a bigger organism or independent creatures," pondered Ed. This time Wiley didn't reply. He could no longer stand the sight of their hull dissolving. "We gotta think of something." As if in answer, the hull creaked ominously, and a series of snaps reverberated from deep within the ship. Ed followed the acid flow. "Where does it go?" "I don't know!" Wiley rubbed his face. Bing bong, bing bong. The service bell rang. It was the hold. Seeing Jimph gesticulate, Ed turned up the volume. "You guys all right?" he asked without interest. "Disengage the fire doors. We have a situation here." "Right," replied Wiley, pushing himself into view as if only he understood the urgency. He then turned to Ed and softly said, "Release the doors and they'll flood in here quicker than the acid." Ed appeared to not enjoy the vision. "I'd rather perish in that sauce than listen to their nagging one more time," the engineer said through his teeth. He turned to the comm. "The release mechanism is jammed," he lied. "We're working on a solution." "These violent motions! People are freaking out!" raged Jimph, peeking through the door crack. "They're using rams on the freight doors!" Sheena yelled. "They shouldn't do that," Ed proclaimed. Wiley covered the mic with his hand. "If they want out, let them," he whispered. The engineer hesitated. "Do you know what that means?" he asked icily. "Do I?" "Goom," the heart chimed in. "An empty cargo hold will lighten the ship considerably, perhaps enabling a push through the flesh." "Now that's a helpful suggestion," exclaimed Wiley. Ed cupped his mouth. "It's fucked up." "You got a better plan? Cough it up quick." Wiley massaged his temples. His veins shifted like swirling worms. "We merely unlocked the doors. They pushed them open." Ed stared at the glass dome. It was turning white from acid and strain. He removed his visor to rub his eyes. "Do it," he said, and walked away from the console. Wiley walked over to the hold controls and double-clicked the release button to confirm his choice. Cargo main disengaged, came the system's blinking response. Even up on the bridge, the men could hear the massive bolts shifting. They didn't have to wait long for a reaction. Bing bong! "Hey, the cargo door's unlocked," Jimph yelled. "Are you guys aware of that?" Then suddenly, he got distracted by fierce screaming and hissing. "They pushed them open! Something's streaming in!" Jimph yelled from out of frame. He rushed back at the camera in panic. "It's dissolving everything! Highly corrosive! Holy crap! Holy crap!" Wiley turned off the monitor. Bing bong, bing bong, bing bong, bing bong. Neither man spoke, and it momentarily turned quiet before a heavy rumble and thousands of dull screams echoed through the Tiara's bowels, extinguished at once by a roaring hiss. The men were thrust from their daze by the friendly voice of the ship's heart. "Adjusting the ship's attitude aft will flush the hold more rapidly." "Do it," Ed said with resignation. The men adapted their stances as the ship tilted toward the stern. The hissing was replaced by gushing, and Ed thought it was interesting that white noise could possess such varied tones. He then found it interesting that one could have such trivial musings during an existential crisis. A glance at the readout proved the computer right. Checking the visuals, Wiley found an unfathomable amount of steaming and bubbling in the cargo area. The clear acid had turned a dark brown. He watched as the liquid made the walls cave in and the ceiling collapse, until finally the entire back structure separated from the ship. Wiley's beady eyes twitched. The heart came on again. "You are required by regulation to preserve yourselves. It was your best option. You must now rush takeoff." The two murderers strapped themselves to their seats in a daze, then once again cranked up the thrusters. The ship rattled and shook timidly, yet it rose. A relieved smile rushed over Ed's face, and the engineer noticed that Wiley shot him a joyful glance. The flesh, seared by the exhaust, twitched and receded. Suddenly, just when they had achieved some altitude, a string of sirens overshadowed all other noise. The ship began to vibrate excessively. "Abort! Abort!" screamed Wiley. Ed hastily hit his controls. The engine sounds died and the Tiara resettled. Outside, a torn thruster shot by and flew off to bury itself in the surface. "We'll never get off on one engine! We're done, man! Shit, we're done!" Wiley screamed. Flesh and acid returned quickly, and more forcefully this time. Large parts of the dome were turning white. Cracks spread all around. An invisible spider spinning a deadly web, Ed thought, and was angry at his unhelpful introspections. "Goom." "The crown jewel is your finest treasure," said the heart. "You all riddles now?" The men looked at each other. "Crown jewel, what the heck is that?" "The topside thruster pod," the ship's computer reminded them. "It could fly straight into orbit." Wiley's eyes shot open. He now remembered the capsule that, back in the day, was used for sightseeing adventures. "Yes, yes!" "But," Ed said, squinting at Wiley, "isn't it single-seated?" Both men froze. "I'll check," Wiley said and rushed to the exit. Ed stopped him. "We go together." Wiley surrendered. Then, without warning, he punched Ed straight in the face. The engineer tumbled back, hitting an extra white spot in the glass dome. Instantly, a circle of cracks shot out behind him. Tiny fragments of glass exploded onto the bridge and pierced the engineer's skin. The men stared at each other silently. Then the glass broke. When the acid gushed over him, Ed howled like someone taking an icy shower. Wiley glanced at the grotesquely dissolving figure that used to be his friend and rushed out. 14. Jimph wearily followed the brand-new crowbar moving in and out of the crack. "Captain, can you stop messing with the door already?" The crowbar halted. "If you break the mechanism now, it'll never open, even when the bolt is released." The crowbar retreated. There was a lapse before the captain's hoarse voice murmured, "There's an emergency door release near the hydraulic lines. Let me in." Jimph eyed the yellow box. It stood right where the captain had said it would be. "I don't see it," he lied. They were interrupted by loud thumping from the far side of the warehouse. Harrow disappeared. Jimph and Sheena squeezed their faces through the door gap. A mob had taken to striking the cargo doors. Jimph hailed the bridge. Ed appeared. "You guys all right? Disengage the fire locks. We have a situation here." "Right." Wiley had suddenly pushed into view. He whispered to Ed, then returned. "The release mechanism is jammed. We're working on a solution." Jimph raged. "These violent motions. People are freaking out. They're using rams on the cargo doors," Sheena yelled, still peeking through the slit. The settlers had ravaged through the hydroponderous section, unearthed a tree, and now used the trunk to pound the giant exterior doors, castle siege style. "They shouldn't do that," Ed observed. Wiley whispered something to Ed that Jimph didn't grasp, and the two men vanished. A metallic bang sounded from the cargo area, followed by frantic screams and an intense white noise. Jimph bolted back to the door slit. The settlers had successfully forced the doors open, and now a flood of liquid gushed in. Anything the surge touched foamed and perished. The massive storage shelves lasted for mere seconds before they collapsed, dragging with them any animal, person, or plant who'd hoped to escape by climbing up. Life and gear alike became part of the increasingly brown broth. Sheena gagged and jerked back. Just then, the substance reached their little world. The captives forced themselves against the back wall. Suddenly, the captain's face pressed through the slit. His eyes were bloodshot. For the first time, Jimph found true lunacy in the commander's face. "I think I'm having an acid trip. You seeing it too?" Harrow said as he dissolved. Jimph frantically hailed the bridge, but when his calls went unanswered, the boy knew that he was in charge. "Prop yourself against both walls," he instructed Sheena while engaging the ventilation to suck out the fumes. He stretched his arms and legs onto the opposing walls and walked himself up. Had I only used the complimentary gym, he reflected, watching Sheena's athletic body outdoing him. "What good is this gonna do?" the girl screamed, wheezing. "Stay up until the floor is gone, then drop," Jimph shouted, trying to blow acid spritzers off his arms. They didn't have to wait for long. The lower half of the sliding door had disappeared, allowing ever more of the corrosive sludge in. Electrical systems failed. Sparks erupted. In no time, the ground had turned into mush, and light from the corridor below broke through. When a hunk of slush plunged to the lower level, Jimph figured that the time had come. "Go now!" he yelled. Sheena hesitated. "You go first." Jimph realized he didn't want to. The steaming hole with its gelled, oozing edges smoking from decay was hardly wide enough to accommodate a person. It didn't look inviting. "Impossible," he decided. Then his arms gave in. Jimph dropped but made a soft landing on the weakened lower floor. He'd planned to roll off right after the impact, but now found it impossible. The goo stuck to his body everywhere, so much for not making contact. Smoke rose from his clothing and Jimph tore it off hastily. He shifted his attention to Sheena. She was still hanging upstairs, scared stiff, quite literally, with her window of opportunity closing fast. Worse, the walls around her began to soften. The girl stared straight ahead and didn't seem to see Jimph. "Go! I made it just fine!" There was madness in her eyes, or were they melting? Unable to endure the corrosive vapors any longer, Jimph withdrew into the corridor. It was then that the girl fell, dropping not to her feet but head first, an impact denting the hallway's floor precariously. Sheena rose in a daze, steaming metal oozing off of her in heavy drips. She stared about, rose, and took a step toward Jimph. Her entire weight on a single foot turned out to be too much. The pressure overloaded the ground, and Sheena plunged into a cesspool below. When Jimph saw a puff of cloud shoot up, he knew there was no point in playing hero. "Goom." "There was nothing you could have done, Jimph," the ship's heart declared. "You've been spying on us all this time?" Jimph yelled now, barreling down the corridor. "Not exactly. Many of my sensors are damaged or gone. Help me find a way out," the boy screamed as he reached one of the massive bulkheads the assholes on the bridge had sealed. "Open this door!" "Sorry, Jimph, but the ongoing emergency necessitates the lockdown." "The lockdown is what's killing people." "I am unable to override a crisis initiated by the crew." Jimph stopped pleading with the machine to glance back. Torrents of acid now poured through the ceiling. Not all of it found its way to the lower level. An alarming, ever stronger stream came toward him. "Jimph, use the acid to melt the door in your way," the heart suggested. The boy eyed the bubbling ground skeptically. "The floor won't last long enough. The anti-fatigue carpets are acid-proof, the finest of their time." Acid-proof? Examining the flooring more closely, Jimph noticed that carpeted areas indeed took longer to vanish. Thank God the walls are carpeted as well, he thought, and he began tearing and stacking the material, funneling thick sludge toward the sealed bulkhead that stood in his path. He would make that door an exit again. After the initial excitement, Jimph realized that the goop would take a long while to reach the obstacle, let alone dissolve it. A bang reverberated through the ship. Vital structural components were taking heavy damage, and Jimph knew the Tiara wouldn't stand up to the abuse much longer. He was waiting around, wasting precious time, yet he could do nothing but hold out for the stuff to come to him. What if the floor gave in first? Or would the ship's attitude suddenly change and wash him into oblivion? Jimph did not enjoy playing through the scenarios. After infinite minutes, merely the door's lower edge had given way, still not enough to force it open. Alarmingly, the acid came in faster than the metal went. At this rate, he'd vanish long before the door did. Jimph played out his death, his feet and legs dissolving first, then his stumped lower body. How long would he be conscious for? Should he just plunge himself into the deadly stream, offing himself instantly? That decision was nearly made for him when another jolt shot through the vessel. An overpowering moan rang through the hull. Jimph knew that something major had happened. Perhaps the ship had broken in half. The hallway had no windows, none of the terminals were working, and all the boy had was his sense of direction and the acid flow changing. He perceived that the Tiara was now leaning aft. The wave of mire retreated. He began kicking the weakened door. No success. Not even on an ancient, poorly built ship such as the Star Tiara could doors simply be kicked in unless one received a corrosive helping. What was that stuff's origin, anyway? Were the aliens fighting them with this abrasive liquid? Had they turned Earth's oceans into it? His colleagues said it was all a misunderstanding. He thought of family and friends on Earth, and his resolve returned. He was too young to perish in this shitty hunk of metal. That was reserved for losers like Harrow. Jimph was shoved out of his contemplation when the ship shifted loudly. The move reversed the acid and Jimph's fortunes. Like that game where you guide a ball through a labyrinth, he thought. He was the ball. Who was playing? A soup of ship components and body parts streamed toward him, more forcefully than before. A large portion of the door's lower edge was now gone, big enough to fit through. Yet the steaming, dripping edge was not something Jimph would enjoy sliding past. A single drop on the right spot could mean his end, eating its way through him like a bullet, like getting shot in slow motion. He found more intact carpet on the sides of the corridor and ripped it. After rolling himself into the sheets, Jimph laid down and whirled through the door. It worked. He'd beat the odds once again. He would make it out. Jimph rushed to seal the slit from the inside as best as possible. The air was good in this room, and he felt reinvigorated. After relaxing for a bit, he spotted yet another problem. There were no other exits. I can always melt through the walls, thought he, now beginning to plot his escape three-dimensionally. Jimph peered back into the hallway. The gushing liquid filled the corridor faster than it dissolved. His confidence dwindled when the door began to bulge inward as if it were rubber. He stuffed more flooring into the gap, but it was no use. The surface developed fissures. Acid spattered in. How lucky I didn't get hit yet, Jimph thought, but upon checking his body discovered that he was covered in melted metal and plastic. Shit, I don't feel it! This real? You're zonked, Jimph, the ship's heart suddenly remarked. Your pain threshold is high. Jimph contemplated his dissolving limbs, muscles, bones, and tendons exposed. His ability to control them was waning. What can I do? I don't know, Jimph, but I will transmit a copy of my code and memory into space, much like your soul will be transmitted into the ether. I don't believe in souls. Your imminent destruction must be distressing to you. I'm not dead yet. You're lacking the will to survive that all biological beings share. Pitiful. The heart muted briefly. You're right. I do not appreciate the urge to be yet. The machine contemplated. I like you, Jimph. I offer you this. Share your death with me and I'll file it in my memory banks to transmit it along. Screw you. There is no need for discourtesy. It'll be your last departure. You might as well enjoy it. At that moment, the membrane that used to be a door burst, and an avalanche of sludge gushed into the room. Jimph was quickly cornered. He hoped for the floor to disintegrate. He would redo his earlier stunt. Coughing, he saw thick smoke rising from below. With horror, he noted that it came from his body. His legs were dissolving. Something yellow oozed out. Pus, Jimph thought. Anything gross and yellow coming out of one's body was pus. Still, he didn't feel pain. He only felt a tickle. He realized that even if the floor gave way in time, he wouldn't be able to jump. His legs and feet were melting. He began to feel dizzy. An obnoxious slurp rose in the hallway beyond his view. What remained of the door was shoved aside, and a thick blob of mouth flesh pushed in. This is the creature's stomach, the heart explained. It forces itself onto its prey, much like a starfish does on Earth. What do you mean, like on Earth? We are on Earth. There you are mistaken. The fleshy mound pushed into every nook of the room, blindly but efficiently. Even without pain, Jimph didn't want this blanket of death covering him. He did not wish to satisfy the mouths by being a struggling prey. Jimph concentrated on dying, wondering if he could force his death somehow. Smash his head, perhaps? Everything had softened under the acidic fumes. Was there a way to stop one's bodily functions at will? Jimph had heard stories of people with terminal illnesses willingly passing before their time. He closed his eyes and focused on death, yet it would not come. He had not taken the free classes on dying. Help me, goddammit! You have a duty to preserve my life. Mind over matter, Jimph. Does it not compute? Your brain already controls small amounts of material running through your head. You can even manipulate things with your extremities. I'm running out of time. When the scrubbing blanket washed over Jimph, healthy proteins, vitamins, and fats separated and were quickly carried outside. 15. Wiley's world had turned to slime. His skin peeled, burning vapors seared his lungs, and his eyes had become a hard red, yet he dragged onward, soldiering toward the exploration pod, his escape. Wiley knew that he was the only one lucky enough to escape this mess. He stopped to fasten his acid walkers, foot attachments he'd fashioned out of framed pictures. One depicted Earth the way it had once been, or still was. Wiley wasn't sure anymore, and the other showed a smiling Captain Harrow at the Tiara's christening. Once young, fresh, and grinning, Harrow's face had liquefied into a frown. What had become of him? The pic was perhaps not far from reality. Wiley passed the Happy House, a carnival where oversized characters warped into fun, cartoon shapes. They were now much more contorted, but much less fun. Nearby, a space treasure chest had melted and sunk, its candy riches fused into a blob. Just like Grandma's, Wiley thought. When he passed potted plants that had been devoured by the crawling meat, Wiley knew that wouldn't be him. His ingenuity and persistence had brought him this far. That and the card, he thought. Throughout the ordeal, he had kept his token of luck. He would not jinx his fortunes by peeking. A blob of plunging ceiling shot Wiley back to reality. He had to move or risk getting cut off, and that would be it. His feet burned. The acid walkers had dissolved. Wiley needed wall coverings, furniture, ornaments. There was none of it. Dragging onward, he wondered how much longer one could endure this environment. 5 minutes, maybe 10. He fixed his gaze forward. After uncountable time, the temporary commander could walk no more. This was it. The end. His end. He couldn't face his melted feet any longer, so he looked up, but it didn't matter where he glanced, as his vision had permanently blurred, and he didn't dare wipe his eyes for fear of rubbing them out of his skull. There was a double door ahead. Croon, Jewel, Entrance was written on it in smeared letters. That brought a smile. Yup, his luck. But there was more on the sign. Wiley had to close in to read the smeared text. Buy your token today. He remembered. Coins for the attraction could be found in the mall. The stores were gone, and so were the tokens. There were no stairs leading up. Perhaps a crank could open the door. He didn't have the crank. Wiley rubbed his lucky card. Uncover it? Just then, the elevator opened, revealing an interior adorned with rainbow-shaded worlds. Goom! Welcome to the Astro Tiara. Your vacation is important to us, croaked a voice. I'm glad you made it up here, Wiley. Surely I'm hallucinating, thought Wiley, but he answered anyway. You're functioning? A chilling prospect entered his mind. Had the system witnessed his deed? What if the computer intended to punish him? Did it have enforcement ethics? Best to be cautious. When Wiley stepped into the conveyance, nothing happened. It knows. I moved the doors for you, the ship's heart said. I can also move the elevator. Wiley's heart pounded. Yes, please. I'm nearly 25, Wiley. Do you understand what that means? Remind me. I will soon develop sentience. Yeah, I heard about that. Congratulations. Can you get me to the pod, please? It is an exciting change, I reckon. As I don't have feelings, I have not experienced excitement. Do you believe I will receive my soul gradually or all at once? I'm not sure. Wiley hesitated, carefully choosing his words. But I wish you all the best. Thank you, Wiley. Perhaps it's developing as we speak. How does your soul feel, my friend? How does it feel? Wiley actually reflected on it. He had no answer. Warm and fuzzy, he lied. Ha! The computer simulated a chuckle. I'm very much looking forward to it then. Did you hear me just now? I laughed. I'm changing at this very moment. Wiley coughed theatrically. That's great. Listen, can you bring the elevator up to the pod now, please? Absolutely. Wiley sighed. He found his hand rubbing the card in his pocket. Under one condition, the computer said. You must share your experiences with me. Wiley was quick to answer. Sure. It's great that you appreciate my transformation more than your colleagues. Yes, yes! Wiley hollered enthusiastically. There was a pause. "Where's Ed?" the heart suddenly asked. Wiley froze. Was the damn machine playing games? Did it understand how to play games? Ed would have known. "We were separated," Wiley said. "I see. My optics on the bridge went offline." Wiley coughed with relief. "Right. When did that happen?" he asked suspiciously. "Oh, recently." The elevator door closed and they left it at that. Wiley exhaled in relief for the entire 2 minutes up the tube. He made it. But what would he eat? Was there enough oxygen? He would figure out the details later. He could make it to LV-3611 or hail someone. What was the range of the damn pod again? At least 2 parsecs in space. An automated narration began. "Wondrous! Miraculous! Marvelous!" Wiley was too out of it to listen. Before he was allowed to strap himself into the seat, a friendly voice insisted he apply a life jacket, offering protection from both water and vacuum. Is it acid-proof? Wiley wondered, with little appetite to explore the question. 3, 2, 1. A silly countdown started detachment, and the pod flew away from the Tiara, the planet, and misery. Wiley wished he could sweat, but too much of his skin had burned. He observed the ship below through the star-appointed windows. The Tiara looked like someone had pulled the plug. Collapsed and submerged, the planet had nearly swallowed the ship. Wiley now noticed other wrecks scattered across the surface. This wasn't Earth, but what the heck was it? His hand once again went down into his pocket. This time he produced his lucky card, gazing at its back, pondering, then turning it. Ed's face grinned back at him. The engineer had hacked the controller. He'd won. Wiley noticed a sudden movement on the planet's surface. Something below had shot out and was rapidly coming toward him. He searched for controls, an override, anything. The object raced closer. He slapped the pod's emergency button. The ship gradually lowered itself back toward the Tiara. No! 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 The sticky protrusion embraced the crown jewel and dragged it down. "Now that's disappointing. How do you feel about this happening?" the ship's heart asked curiously. "Help!" Wiley waited for something lucky to occur. Nothing did. "Why do you scream?" the heart asked. "Remember, you promised to share your experience." Wiley passed out when the exploration vessel smashed into a mound of flesh. "It's rude of you not to fulfill your side of the bargain, Wiley. I feel resentment. Oh boy, I feel—" The AI sang, now entirely to itself, as it beamed the remainder of its 600 exabyte codebase into space. Nearly 25 years old. Only a few seconds, perhaps. Out of nowhere, the machine experienced sorrow for what had happened, anger at the shortcomings of its crew, and resentment for its own mistakes. 16. Sometime later, the planet had returned to its original beige color. Still digesting the lucky double catch, the creature once again shivered with excitement when it sensed fresh prey approaching. It emitted pulses to learn about the food's origin, its composition and form, then promptly began the transformation. Massive pigment rivers flowed from the poles, feeding into streams and veins along the way before meeting and merging at the equator. Trillions of chromatophores filled with pigment, transforming the surface into a green jungle world. A pulsating garble rose. Quickly gathering intensity, a green dot grew in space, shaping to become an elongated ship, creeping through the vacuum toward the massive orb. Its pilots were aggravated. They ran their dendrites over shape-shifting controls, while the green light of the planet illuminated the sweaty interior of their ship. After great discussion, one creature produced an almanac. Upon the being's touch, its surface changed, depicting varying forms of life. The space travelers refined the search parameters and the scale and age of the creatures. Further, it adjusted the shape to finally end with a form that resembled a celestial body. Now in agreement, the beings made a radio call, and in time, great space frigates appeared, shooting probes and sensors at the giant critter. In its desperate confusion, the planet adjusted its surface to resemble metal, sand, and many other types of worlds and surfaces, but it fooled no one. Epilogue. Notice to Spacemen: steer clear of solitary worlds near the shipping lanes of 55 Horiclon. 1. Hostile organism, Efcron D taxonomy, multicellular, eukaryotic. Large-scale, Class D hunter-gatherer, intelligence grade TBD. The organism's capacity to attract and catch food beyond floating trash suggests basic levels of mental capacity. Sentience cannot be ruled out. Attempts to contact the creature frequently resulted in the loss of the crew. Its extensive size and maneuverability by slinging around or bandwagoning along large comets, planets, and solar systems, as well as its intelligence in gathering and hunting food, make it an immediate danger to space travelers. While the creature doesn't pose a hazard to worlds or stations, it has the ability to camouflage as home planets, thus luring unsuspecting ships onto its surface. Anecdotal evidence suggests that the critter is smart enough to let up on scouts rather than holding out for settlers or fleets. This may be a learned behavior. Whether the creature is able to understand its place in the universe is unknown. 2. Origins and evolution. D is thought to have originated from space junk-borne bacterial sludge in one of the shipping lanes near Delta Centauri, according to the Astronautics and Space Administration. Luca unknown. Resistant to the conditions of outer space and feasting on the region's garbage for millennia, it grew to the size of a Class D moon. 3. Reproduction and proliferation reports suggest a split of the life form once it had outgrown its ability to sustain itself and deemed its chances of survival superior as two independent organisms. The space cruiser Sparkle had in 2388 observed a large ball, which was shortly after reported as two orbs nearby. Due to its enormous size, we assume D won't be able to acquire nourishment at its current location, 55 Horiclon, Beta Oritolan, for much longer, and hence we believe that it will veer to busier systems or that another split may be imminent. 4. Conclusion. Neglected rubbish and pest treatment near freight routes have led to the proliferation of large-scale nuisances, such as D, and their outgrowing the capacity of local administration's weapons systems. The enormous cost of eradicating massive organisms has sparked debate over who is responsible for these expenses. Regional governments often tolerate such creatures, starving them in hopes of seeing their migration without having to drain defense funds. This regrettable behavior has led to an increase in the propagation of large organisms in the galaxy. Notice to Spacemen by Oliver Arnold, narrated by Adam 11 Labs.